Hey everyone, dear friends. This is Drake on the Crime Story Diaries channel. Today we'll be examining a horrifying case, so I invite you to watch the video. Don't forget to leave your comments and likes. Cassie Farrington was born on December 22, 1990 in the state of Virginia, USA. She was the second child in a family that also included 3 other growing children. Her parents, Darlene and Garrett, tried to give their daughter a good upbringing. They encouraged Cassie's passion for sports and her desire to do well in school. Cassie was indeed a diligent student. Teachers noted not only her hard work and good academic performance, but also her active lifestyle. The sociable and friendly girl readily made friends and participated in school activities. From an early age, Cassie had a dream: to become a doctor in order to help people. After graduating from high school, she planned to enroll in medical college and become a nurse. However, at the age of 16, an event took place that forever changed young Cassie's life. The girl met Bradley Farrington, a boy her own age. A whirlwind romance flared up, and soon Cassie realized she was pregnant. Bradley proposed to his beloved, as he apparently had the most serious of intentions. In 2008, immediately after finishing high school, the lovers secretly got married. Cassie left her parents' home in Virginia and moved in with her young husband in the small town of Silver City, New Mexico. There, the newlyweds began their independent life. Bradley joined the police force, while Cassie prepared to become a mother. At first, Cassie and Bradley's married life wasn't going badly. The young woman gave birth to their firstborn in 2009 and devoted herself completely to the child. At the same time, she didn't give up hope of getting a medical education. Cassie signed up for a distance learning program at a college, striving to combine her studies with raising her son. 3 years later, in 2012, Cassie gave birth to their second child. The responsibilities of caring for 2 kids in the household now fell on her shoulders. But the young mother didn't lose heart, dreaming of finishing college and getting a job as a nurse. To earn some extra money, Cassie even took a few night shifts at the Silver City Hospital. Meanwhile, cracks began to appear in the couple's relationship. Bradley, who was quite satisfied with being the sole breadwinner, started reproaching his wife for being too busy with her studies and work. In his opinion, a mother of 2 should stay at home and only deal with family matters. Over time, the reproaches turned into outright nitpicking and insults. Bradley increasingly raised his hands against Cassie, beating her under any pretext: an insufficiently clean floor, a cold dinner, or crying children. At first, the woman endured her husband's rudeness and physical abuse, considering herself to be at fault. She hoped that she would be able to please her spouse, thereby preserving the family. But Bradley's outbursts of aggression became more frequent. Now, it was the children's turn. He could yell at them for no reason, roughly grab their arm, or smack them upside the head. Cassie complained about her police officer husband to his colleagues, but they merely threw up their hands at the station. There was no evidence of domestic violence, apart from the victim's words. Moreover, Bradley enjoyed the respect of his co-workers. Realizing that there was no way to rein in the tyrant, Cassie decided to take a desperate step. She filed for divorce, took the children, and left her husband. Before leaving, a terrible conversation took place.
"You're not going anywhere," the enraged Bradley yelled. "I'll easily get rid of you and not face any punishment. All the cops are my friends. It's nothing for them to hush up the case, and the kids will go to me."
At the age of 22, Cassie found herself in the unenviable position of being a single mother with 2 children to support. She continued to take on shifts at the Silver City Hospital and worked nights as a caregiver, striving to provide her sons with everything they needed. The meager alimony payments that her ex-husband made reluctantly and irregularly were catastrophically insufficient. Cassie rented a small apartment together with her colleague Chanel. Both women understood that there was no other way out. Living alone and paying rent on a single salary was impossible in provincial Silver City. Leaving the children with a nanny, the young mothers worked around the clock. The ex-husband didn't leave Cassie alone. Learning of her plans to sue for increased alimony, Bradley began openly stalking his ex-wife. He called at all hours of the day and night, heaping curses and threats on the unfortunate woman, and one time, lying in wait for Cassie near her home, he forced her into his car and drove her off somewhere. Late in the evening, the frightened woman returned home in tears. To all of Shannell's questions, Cassie responded evasively, referring to a nervous breakdown due to the litigation with her ex-husband. Only after a few days did she confess to her roommate that Bradley had taken her out of town and brutally beaten her, threatening to kill her if she didn't give up her claims for alimony and the children. After this nightmarish incident, Cassie seriously feared for her life. She even wanted to leave Silver City and go wherever her eyes led her, but the mere thought of losing her job and roof over her head filled her with horror. And abandoning her beloved profession when she had only a year left until receiving her nursing diploma seemed like an unforgivable folly. During this difficult period in Cassie's life, a glimmer of hope appeared. She met David Barry, a modest, kind, and decent guy. The new boyfriend immediately endeared himself to the children, becoming a true friend to them. Cassie couldn't be happier with how quickly her sons became attached to their new dad. The brief experience of her first marriage, full of beatings and humiliation, made Cassie exercise caution. She observed David for a long time before finally trusting him completely. But the more the young people interacted, the more Cassie became convinced that she had finally met true love and a reliable life partner. In the spring of 2013, David proposed to his beloved. Without hesitation, Cassie agreed. They decided to have the wedding in August, right after the bride received her nursing diploma. The lovers made bright plans. They wanted to buy a spacious house for a large family and have a child together. Alas, Cassie's dreams of feminine happiness and domestic comfort were not destined to come true. The morning of March 24, 2014, did not portend trouble. As usual, Cassie finished her night shift at the hospital and was heading home. On the way, she called her mother and shared her plans to pick up her sons from daycare, take them to school, and get some much-needed sleep before her next shift. Darlene wished her daughter a good day. At noon, having finished her household chores, the woman decided to take a nap. And then the phone rang, making her blood run cold. The daycare teacher, where her grandsons went, anxiously reported that Cassie had not picked up the children and was not answering her phone. The concerned Darlene began calling all of her daughter's acquaintances and colleagues. To no avail. Cassie wasn't picking up. Then the mother remembered Shannell, the roommate who might have visited her friend. In a voice trembling with worry, Darlene asked the girl to go home and check on her daughter, in case she had fallen ill or was sound asleep. The alarmed Shannell rushed home. No one responded to her knocking. Instead, an ominous sound of running water came from inside, as if a pipe had burst. Entering the apartment with her own key, Shannell headed for the bathroom and froze. In the filled to the brim bathtub lay Cassie, her face submerged in the water. She was wearing the clothes she usually wore to work. Fighting the rising panic, Shannell pulled her friend's body out of the water. She tried to perform artificial respiration, cardiac massage, but in vain. Cassie wasn't breathing. Her skin was cold. Only then did it dawn on the frightened roommate that she was the first to discover a terrible crime. The medics who arrived at Shannell's call merely threw up their hands. They could only pronounce death, which had occurred about 5 hours ago. The young woman's body was taken to the morgue. The house was cordoned off by the police. Experts began examining the scene, hoping to clarify the circumstances of the death. Investigators noted a strange detail. In both bathrooms, the faucets were turned on full blast. Water had flooded the apartment floor, turning the dwelling into a kind of aquarium. It seemed the killer had deliberately staged a flood, trying to hide traces of the crime. On the floor lay Cassie's glasses and hair ties in disarray, along with a broken towel rack, eloquent evidence of a desperate struggle. Upon careful examination of the corpse, the criminal investigation expert discovered numerous bruises and contusions characteristic of strangulation, which was confirmed by the strangulation mark on her neck. Without waiting for the official autopsy results, the police proceeded to search for the killer. The circle of suspects narrowed to the victim's inner circle, her husband, family, friends, and acquaintances. After all, Neither the locks nor the windows of the apartment had been broken into, so Cassie herself had let the killer in, not sensing the danger. The terrible news was conveyed to Cassie's parents by phone. Beside themselves with grief, Darlene and Garrett rushed to Silver City. At the police station, 2 frightened grandsons awaited them. The little ones couldn't understand why their beloved mother hadn't picked them up from daycare, and why everyone around them was crying, repeating that their mom was gone. The investigation into Cassie Farrington's murder was entrusted to local police detective Jose Sanchez. At first, he tried to work out the main leads and question potential witnesses. Apartment owner Chanel, the first to discover the body, had an alibi. She was at work at the time of the crime, which was confirmed by surveillance camera footage. The victim's fiancé GC, David Barry, was also quickly excluded from the list of suspects, as he was at his workplace under the observation of colleagues and cameras at the time of the murder. Chanel's husband, Billy, aroused the detective's suspicions with his strange behavior. After the murder, he took a carpet from the house and left for Alaska. But upon returning, he passed a polygraph test and convinced Sanchez of his non-involvement. Many witnesses in conversations with the detective repeatedly mentioned Cassie's complaints about her ex-husband Bradley, who stalked her, demanding that she give up alimony and threatening her with physical violence. Moreover, it turned out that police officer Bradley Farrington was well acquainted with Detective Sanchez. Despite such suspicious circumstances pointing to the ex-husband's likely involvement in the murder, Sanchez did not seriously consider Bradley as a suspect. Instead, he unexpectedly put forward a version about Cassie's suicide, despite obvious signs of a violent death and evidence of a struggle at the crime scene. This made Cassie's parents doubt the detective's competence and impartiality. With the help of the district attorney, they managed to have Sanchez removed from the case and a new investigator appointed. The case was taken over by young detective Jess Watkins. After studying the case files, she concluded that her predecessor had made a host of mistakes and omissions that could negatively affect the course of the investigation. In particular, Sanchez did not thoroughly examine the crime scene, did not question a number of potential witnesses, and hastily handed over the apartment to the owner for repairs and renting to new tenants. Watkins tried to correct her colleagues' oversights. She scrupulously studied Cassie's personality and biography, questioned her friends, colleagues, and neighbors. Many of them unanimously stated that the deceased had repeatedly complained about being stalked and threatened by her ex-husband Bradley, who served in the police force. A telling episode came to light. Shortly before her death, Cassie told her friends how Bradley had forcibly pushed her into his car, taken her out of town, and brutally beaten her, demanding that she give up alimony and custody of the children. He openly threatened to kill his ex-wife, hinting at his connections among fellow police officers who would help him avoid punishment. Watkins took Bradley Farrington seriously. Interesting facts emerged. It turns out that a few months before Cassie's murder, her ex-husband had been fired from the police force under suspicious circumstances, and on the day of the crime, he had a 2-hour period for which he had no alibi. The detective requested an analysis of the suspect's DNA and fingerprints and began to work out possible circumstantial evidence. These actions by the new investigator alarmed Bradley. He began to obstruct the investigation in every way possible, threatening Watkins with trouble at work, hinting at his connections in law enforcement. But Jess showed integrity and perseverance, continuing to methodically gather evidence of Farrington's guilt in the murder of his ex-wife. Cassie's shocking death, literally on the eve of her new wedding, could not be a coincidence. Detective Jess Watkins became convinced of this as she scrupulously studied all the circumstances of the tragedy. She also managed to obtain curious information about Bradley Farrington. It turns out that 6 months ago, the brave police officer had to resign at his own request, allegedly after a protracted conflict with the authorities related to disciplinary penalties. Rumor had it that the lieutenant had caught Farrington dozing at his post and dead drunk. He started an investigation, began collecting dirt on the negligent subordinate. Well, without thinking twice, he wrote a resignation report. In fact, the reason for Bradley's dismissal was much more prosaic. he was caught selling official information. As Watkins managed to find out, the valiant guardian of order had been leaking information about upcoming raids and searches to local thugs, both contraband, prostitution, underground casinos, and drug dens. He didn't disdain anything that could bring in an extra dollar. When the first rumors began to circulate, Farrington's ill-wishers became restless. They had long suspected that Bradley's well-being was not based on a policeman's salary. Soon, the Internal Affairs Department received an anonymous tip about the lieutenant's unseemly dealings. And although the accused vehemently denied it, there was more than enough evidence against him. During the covert investigation, other crimes by Farrington were also revealed. Violence against detainees, concealment of important evidence, falsification of criminal cases. It got to the point where the corrupt cop was supplying criminals with weapons and covering for the leaders of local gangs to avoid punishment. No wonder that with such patrons, Bradley held the law in contempt and considered himself invulnerable. Jess Watkins easily figured out the real reason why Cassie's ex-husband had committed the malfeasance. After the divorce, he lost access to his wife's money and got hooked on criminal earnings. After all, he had to somehow pay for mistresses, entertainment, not to mention gambling and expensive trinkets, without which the womanizer and carouser Bradley could not imagine his existence. As Watkins unraveled the tangle of Farrington's old and new villainies, her conviction grew regarding the scoundrel's involvement in Cassie's death. The connection between the cop's ruined career and the murder of his ex-wife was all too obvious. Bradley could easily have gained entry to her home, intimidated her, forced her to let him inside, and then brutally kill her, staging it as a suicide. After all, he had the keys to the apartment, which he refused to return despite all court orders. Moreover, during his years of service in law enforcement, Farrington had thoroughly studied forensics and learned to cover his tracks with virtuosity. He knew what experts paid attention to first when examining a crime scene. That's why he flooded the ill-fated bathroom with water, trying to wash away fingerprints and skin particles. And while the sluggish police conducted the initial examination, he vanished from the city in an unknown direction. But the meticulous Jess Watkins did not allow the villain to escape. She initiated a search through all databases and soon discovered that Farrington had flown to Mexico on false documents. Apparently, he was afraid of the heat and hastened to lie low, and at the same time, to wait out until the passion surrounding his murdered ex-wife subsided. Watkins spent a whole month arranging for a warrant for the suspect's arrest and extradition. The Mexican authorities cooperated, and now a haggard and rather battered by life, Bradley appeared before the investigator. During the interrogation, he denied everything as before, pretending to be an offended innocent. He allegedly left quite by accident, learning about the death of his ex-wife while already on vacation. But Watkins's ironclad arguments backed the liar into a corner. She presented the cop, confident in his invulnerability, with incontrovertible evidence. Testimony from numerous witnesses about his erratic behavior before and after Cassie's murder. Results of an independent forensic medical examination confirming the victim's violent death by strangulation. Cell phone records exposing Farrington's lie regarding his whereabouts on the day of the tragedy. The tenacious investigator's main trump card, however, was footage from a neighboring house's security camera. The footage clearly shows Bradley entering Cassie's entryway on the morning of March 24th, and 2 hours later, right around the estimated time of death, leaving his ex-wife's house. Though the face is not discernible, the jacket and sneakers are the same ones he later wore when he flew to Mexico. The investigator also managed to find witnesses from the airport. They confirmed that on the day of his departure, Farrington looked extremely nervous and kept glancing around, as if he feared being followed or asked unwanted questions. Watkins knew for certain the villain was in a hurry to leave the crime scene before Cassie's body was discovered. At the face-to-face confrontation, Bradley continued to persist. He accused his ex-wife of slander and mudslinging, threatening Watkins with trouble at work. However, he broke down only when the detective placed before him the conclusion about the discrepancy between the DNA taken from his saliva and the skin particles extracted from under Cassie's nails. "It was an accident. I didn't mean to kill her, honest," Bradley sobbed. After that, all Watkins had to do was carefully record the murderer's confession. According to him, he came to his ex-wife early in the morning, allegedly to discuss the details of seeing the children on the upcoming weekend. The heated conversation smoothly transitioned into passionate embraces. Bradley still felt a strong attraction to Cassie. She flatly refused intimacy, stating that she was marrying someone else. In response, the enraged ex-husband called her a bad woman who had traded him for the first man she met. A scuffle ensued, in the heat of which the frenzied man knocked Cassie to the floor and began strangling her. She desperately resisted, scratched, tried to call for help, but the strength was unequal. After a few minutes, the woman went limp in the hands of the killer. Coming to his senses from the bloody frenzy, Bradley became frightened by what he had done. He quickly realized that he needed to cover his tracks and quietly slip away. He dragged his ex-wife's lifeless body into the bathtub, turned on the water. He hoped that the investigators would write off Cassie's death as a suicide or an accident. Now he understood how naive his calculations had been. At the trial, Bradley Farrington behaved defiantly. He bombarded the judge and jury with motions, challenged the evidence, accused witnesses of perjury. He claimed police brutality and incompetence of the investigation. He even tried to feign temporary insanity at the time of the murder. He allegedly did not know what he was doing, blinded by rage that clouded his mind. But the irrefutable evidence gathered by Jess Watkins did its job. By court decision, Bradley Farrington was found guilty of the premeditated murder of his ex-wife. Taking into account aggravating circumstances in the form of recidivism, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. When the verdict was announced, a ringing silence reigned in the courtroom. The relatives of the deceased Cassie wept quietly, from the pain of loss, from a sense of irreparable loss, but also from a barely perceptible relief. Justice had been done, and now the soul of the unfortunate woman would find peace, and her killer had earned the most severe punishment. After the trial of Bradley Farrington, custody of Cassie's orphaned sons, 4-year-old Jake and 2-year-old Kevin, was transferred by court order to their father's parents. The inconsolable grandmother and grandfather on the side of the deceased mother, Darlene and Garrett, tried to challenge this decision. They filed an appeal, stating their desire and moral right to raise and nurture their grandsons. As arguments, Cassie's relatives cited the fact that, unlike the Farringtons, who had virtually no involvement in the boys' lives, they constantly visited their daughter and grandsons, helped raise the little ones, took them for walks, to the zoo and the movies. Even after Cassie's tragic death, Darlene and Garrett tried not to leave the orphans without attention and care. They sent money for their support, bought clothes and educational toys. However, the appeals court upheld the decision unchanged. The official guardians of Cassie's children remained their paternal grandparents. Moreover, they made it clear to the relatives on the deceased's side that they would not allow them to see or communicate with their grandsons. They justified this by saying that they did not want to stir up the children's already wounded psyche with unnecessary reminders of their tragically deceased mother. Thus, Darlene and Garrett were deprived not only of their beloved daughter, but also of the opportunity to fully participate in the life and upbringing of her orphaned sons. At the time of the described events, it is unknown whether they managed to obtain permission to at least occasionally see their grandsons. One can only imagine how difficult it is for elderly people who have lost their only child to also be cut off from her children, who so remind them of the untimely departed Cassie. The story of Cassie Farrington is a vivid example of how even the closest people sometimes become the worst enemies. Bradley, once a loving husband and father, turned into a domestic tyrant and later a cold-blooded killer of the mother of his own children. District Police Officer Jose Sanchez, called upon to protect citizens, betrayed his duty by negligently investigating the murder case. Perhaps, if not for the tenacity of Detective Jess Watkins, this horrific crime would have remained unsolved. The most terrible thing is that the children, left without a mother due to their father's fault, are now also deprived of the opportunity to communicate with relatives who sincerely love them and are ready to take care of them. At their young age of not even 5 and 3 years old, the boys have already experienced the pain of losing the closest person, and now they are forced to grow up with indifferent guardians who prevent their meetings with loving grandparents. One can only hope that over time, the hearts of the Farringtons will soften, and they will allow Cassie's grandsons to see their mother's relatives, that the boys' lives will turn out as well as possible, despite all the adversities that have befallen them at such a young age, and that the memory of a loving mother, who even after the divorce did everything for their happiness, will help them grow up to be decent people. And Darlene and Garrett are left to continue the court battle for the right to participate in the upbringing of their grandsons. For the sake of the bright memory of their daughter, who dreamed that her children would grow up in an atmosphere of love and care. And for the sake of the hope that justice will someday still prevail, that the criminal who destroyed their family will bear the deserved punishment and will never be able to harm his children, and that Cassie, innocently killed at the hands of a domestic tyrant, will find peace in heaven. Her inconsolable parents believe that there on high, their beloved daughter invisibly watches over her orphaned boys and prays to God that everything will be all right for her little ones.